right. Thank you very much, Mike, and great to be here. I will try to share a little bit of what you've mentioned, give you a little peek into how we're thinking about Spotify, and maybe convince you that much as technology is absolutely my passion and passion of a lot of people at Spotify, is probably not the most important thing. Framing is useful for us to build really good organizations. Let me just get myself here started with a little timer so that we don't go over time. I find it super helpful. So we'll quickly do it and get right into it. So let's start with some pictures. How do you like this nice, lovely rustic kitchen? Or this more modern kitchen? Or maybe you like a minimalist kitchen. You know, I'm showing you kitchens here because in the last few months, we've been doing big refurbishment project in a new house that we moved into. So obviously kitchens were on my mind, but no, I haven't messed up this presentation with my mood board at home. I want you to ask yourself this question: which kitchen do you want? And really the question I think we're wanting to ask ourselves is which software development organizations we want. So as Mike said, I'm Marcin Floryan. I'm a tech tribe lead at Spotify, and I work with an organization that is called Playback. And Playback is a bunch of people, about 80 people altogether now, who are building the core experiences for Spotify, the playback experiences. So where do we start our journey? We start at the beginning with the words of a very wise king. Begin at the beginning, the king said very gravely. But what is the beginning? For many people, beginning of a transformation journey is somewhere here. Or maybe the beginning of your transformation is rather here. Or maybe even some of you were so inspired that you thought that the beginning of your journey should be this. I think you all recognize these as some models for scaling and building agile organizations. But I would like to argue with you today that that is not the right beginning. That is not the place to start. And to support like my reflection, I want to bring in a thought from Douglas McGregor in his book, The Human Side of Enterprise. It's a pretty old book, and every single time I go back to it, I'm surprised how old and yet modern it feels. And maybe some of the language is not super up to date. One of the thoughts that Douglas McGregor leaves in that book is that he really wants to urge management, and this is all of us leaders who work with organizations, to examine our assumptions and make them explicit. So what are these assumptions? Like we sometimes could call them assumptions or beliefs or the values that we have. Like what do we hold, what do we think holds true for how people interact with each other, why people are in our organizations, you know, why they are there to do the work that they're doing. You know, are they there for the money? Are they there because they have a passion? Are they there for the social aspect? So for me, this is a really valuable pointer of where to start. So we start by looking inwards, by trying to understand where we are, how we think, what are our mental models for the organization. And once we do this, you know, I have this very stark quote from Taiichi Ohno. I love it. Taiichi Ohno is, of course, behind Toyota. What he said a long time ago was that we should stop trying to borrow wisdom and think for ourselves. So he encouraged everyone to face your difficulties and think and solve your problems yourself. Right? This is pretty stark, right? This is pretty extreme because, like, forget about what's going out elsewhere. Look at the situation that you have in your organization and try to solve this. And of course, this is, I would say, you know, don't take it verbatim. It's not about ignoring everything that's happening elsewhere. Otherwise, today and this whole event wouldn't make sense. I mean, this event is great for inspiration and getting ideas and having different points of view, but it's not about taking solutions. So what Daichi was really talking here about was about not trying to just wholesale adopt existing solutions. So when you think about how to approach now, like this process of, like, we understand some basics, we understand some of our principles and our assumptions, and we know that we have to figure this out. How do we go about figuring this out, about building our organization? And I really want to encourage you, because this is quite fascinating when I see this across the industries, that we have been getting so good at knowing how to improve the way we build our products. And we have been getting so good about thinking how we build our software, right? And, you know, we do MVPs, we do A/B tests, we run experiments, we go out and do user research. You know, these are all amazing tools that help us deliver better solutions to our customers. And yet these are solutions that could also be applicable to thinking about our own organizations, and yet we don't tend to use them. And if we go back to the Agile Manifesto, there are many great things in there, but I believe this particular quote, for me, the favorite bit: at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. I want to pull out two things. Like, first of all, regular reflection, you know, trying to understand how we're working, what makes us effective, what makes us less effective. But also it talks about adjusting our behaviors. It doesn't talk about remodeling our organizations, bringing in new models, new structures, or new values or new cultures, but just at looking about our behaviors. Because ultimately, how our organizations function is all about how we interact and behave. So then I could summarize this approach into, you know, where to start and how to go about building and scaling an organization, is that we have to start by experimenting with the setup, with the structures, with people's roles, with people's responsibilities. Creating those experiments small so that we can iterate, repeat them, check what happens, and then integrate what we've learned into the next iteration. But that was a very good list for 2020. And of course, we all have been through quite a lot of change. And if the experience of working from home and the global pandemic has taught me anything, is that there's something else that is critical as we're going through this process. And that is the 2021 version, where we have to start by creating safety. So create organizations where these experiments, these iterations, and the integration of those ideas can happen in an environment where everyone feels included, involved, and feels safe to get involved. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this safety in a few slides. But I just want to bring it out here that I think now it really becomes very important. So let's look at a little example of Spotify. And, you know, talking about these basic assumptions, here's one of those basic assumptions that Daniel has been sharing with us. Daniel is the CEO of Spotify and one of the founders. So he keeps telling all of us that we aim to make mistakes faster than anyone else. And I love that quote, and I've heard it many times, but what does that mean, right? I mean, that does not mean an encouragement to be sloppy, an encouragement to be ignorant. It's not an encouragement to do things poorly and quickly. It is an encouragement or a recognition that what we do as a business is unknown, that we're charting new territory, that we are experimenting. And if we are truly experimenting, we have to recognize that experiments come with a very important aspect, which is some of them will fail. So some of them will feel like we've made a mistake. We tried something and it's not quite the thing. And that's why Daniel is encouraging us to make those mistakes faster than anyone else. Because if we are making mistakes, that's a sign of us taking risks and experimenting. And if we're doing it quickly, that means that over a number of experiments, we can actually get to the solutions that we really need. And then if I kind of dig a little bit deeper and share with you some of the guiding principles that I have used in my organization, and of course they don't represent the thinking of all of Spotify, but this is how I have internalized and translated some of those directions or ideas from Daniel for my own organization. So, I believe that if we were to experiment and experiment effectively, we need transparency. And what does this transparency mean? I'll give you some specific example and talk a little bit more about this, but this is about fundamentally giving people the right information. This is about collaboration. We all know now that it is impossible to solve most of the meaningful problems in isolation, on our own, as individuals, or even as small teams. That's why we want to build those bigger organizations. That's why we're thinking about scaling. I mean, we wouldn't be scaling if we could solve these problems in teams of 4, teams that can share a pizza. That was enough. Then, that's a wonderful, simple setup, which can leave all the complexity. And actually, we're bringing in some of this complexity because it allows us to solve bigger problems. Of course, as we're going through this process, it is essential that we have effective feedback loops through time, through structures, through the organization, through different levels. We also need very clear expectations. That's something that has been, a quite a meaningful guiding principle for me that has been brought into organization by one of the agile coaches we were lucky to work with, Gita, who might actually be today here on this call. So a special shout out to her today. That as we're working together, it is very important to set clear expectations for people. And then last but not least, as I said, a sense of safety, and specifically psychological safety. So let's look at transparency quickly. Transparency means that people have access to the information that is relevant to their work. That's how I see this, that they do not have to second guess what is going on. And I want to share one little practice that I have been doing. And actually, as of this morning, I calculated that I've probably sent 150 or more of these emails over the weeks and years that I've been working. And that is my little top 3 check-in. So every Monday morning, I send this summary of my week saying, these are the top 3 things that I'm going to focus on as a leader of this organization. And I really want to ask you to reflect and ask yourselves, do you know what your leaders are actually working on every week? What's on their agenda? What is their focus? So I do this because it helps me focus, because if I make a commitment to my organization that this is what I'm going to try and solve, I will probably focus more effectively on this. But it also creates this information for people and allows to create a conversation, sorry about that, so that this becomes two-way. And this is why I've shared here a little screenshot on my inbox. You can see that many of these emails actually get a response, and some of them get a response in my inbox, some of them get a response in the office when we're in the office or on Slack. So this is actually something that allows me also to engage with the organization. This transparency works both ways effectively. And there are many, many more examples of transparency that we have at Spotify. But I would, for example, everyone has access to all the results of the company, or all the important metrics, or all the indicators, or all the key strategies, and not just when they're published, but also when they're being written. So the second pillar, the second principle is collaboration. And how do we make collaboration real? So here I have one, again, just one little example of a practice that I've been using in my organization, which we very simply call tribe stand-up. Some people would call it Scrum of Scrums. And this is an idea that basically, from those 80 people, there's a representation that gets together once a week where people talk about what they've just delivered and what they're going to work on. And this may not feel like a big thing, But we've worked very hard to tweak this and make this, not a reporting meeting, not a status meeting, but genuinely an information sharing meeting. And we've seen, this is not a meeting where managers come. This is a meeting where we expect all sorts of people like engineers, managers, PMs, EMs, whoever is in the organization who feels like they can contribute to come there. And we really encourage everyone to have been to this meeting at least once over a period of time. And what we've discovered is that this sharing of the work, of course, creates better learning, better cohesion, sense of belonging, and a commitment. Like when you stand up in front of all the other teams that are in the organization again and say, next we're going to deliver this, it kind of feels a bit more serious because you're doing this commitment not to your manager or not to a backlog or not to a sprint plan, but to other peers in your organization. We also use a practice that has been actually, borrowed from one of those big models I showed earlier, big room planning. I'm sure many of you do this. And again, for us, this has been a way to create collaboration. But what we do during big room planning, which I hope some of you do as well, is we don't come and present ready-made plans. But what we do is we do this iteration over a day where we say, this we think are our priorities. And people say, okay, with these priorities, this is the work that we think we're going to do. These are our objectives that we're going to write. And then we look at those objectives together and evaluate, like, are they the right objectives? Are they going to get us there? And we tweak them. And, at that time, you can have some pictures of these conversations going on. You can see people who you see there are not just managers, but also engineers. We leave that meeting with a much better sense of understanding of what we're working on together. I talked about feedback loops. Again, lots of practices of creating feedback loops. One small example I want to share today is this idea of taps with squads. The origin of the name has been lost in the annals of Spotify time. We think it's, maybe it's about tapping on the shoulder, and maybe it's about tapping as in a, rhythm in a music score. But basically, this is the idea where me and my product peer meet with every team, usually once a quarter, and we talk about what was the impact that this team had, what's their future, what's their health, and what kind of help or support that might need from the leaders. And this is, again, not about a reporting meeting, and it's not about us as leaders getting information from the team, but about the teams having a more structured and well-organized interaction opportunity with the leaders, where they are the ones who are bringing topics, and they are the ones who are asking us questions, and they are the ones who are hopefully getting most of the value out of this. And of course, by the way, this is by far not the only way in which we were interacting with those teams. And we also have this little practice of opening up, inviting people for lunches with the leads. Of course, this doesn't happen now since we're working from home, but when we were all in the office, we just had this very simple sign-up form that anyone could go to and say, I want to go and spend a lunch with our leads. And we would, of course, take people out for those lunches and would have wonderful conversations. And like the low friction of getting this, if I say to people, oh, you can go with me for lunch whenever you want, but actually my calendar is full and I'm never around, that's not a low friction engagement. But if I give people a sign up form that I react on and I make sure I have time in my calendar to book it, then it's much easier to create this collaboration and engagement with people. I talked about clear expectations already a little, so just quickly, it turns out people really need expectations, that they benefit from having a clear boundaries, because those clear boundaries allow them to feel autonomous. And when people feel autonomous, which means they have a sense of agency, they have a sense that they have influence on the work they're doing, and they're just, again, more engaged there. And here are just some very simple examples of the expectations that we've been setting with our teams. Very explicitly, it's much better for people to know this upfront and be able to discuss this than always second guess, what does our leaders actually want from us? Also, as we're creating this autonomy, there's a quote from one of our agile coaches, Jason Eeb from New York, that autonomy isn't really a benefit and should be treated as a benefit. It's an expectation of responsibility. Now we're coming to psychological safety. Again, we could do an entire separate talk about psychological safety. So for those of you who haven't come across this term, it's been coined by Amy Edmondson and popularized. She's a scientist in the US. And she says that psychological safety describes a climate in which raising a dissenting view is expected and welcomed. A tolerance of dissent allows productive discussion and early detection of problems. So creating an organization where everyone feels like they can ask questions, disagree, admit mistakes. And of course, all these things can happen if we are, as leaders, are the first one to do it. And again, we're not going to spend much time here. I think Mike will be able to maybe share the slides later on for people to look a little bit more deeply. This actually also hangs pinned to my Twitter stream. This is the set of agreements. And again, it's kind of expectations that we set in my tribe with all the people who are there, worked on this together so that we know what does this psychological safety means in terms of behaviors, right? That's the topic I've mentioned before. That's so important to talk about behaviors more than just, we want to have a cultural psychological safety. Okay, so what next? So I'm going to go back to Amy and pull on her other research. So she says that learning organizations, and for me, these learning organizations are the organizations which evolve and experiment and do those iterations, are created by focusing renewed employee attention on work, not by trying to change the culture, right? So we have to really look at what Taijiana was saying, like, try to solve your own problems. What McGregor was saying, examine your assumptions. And Amy's saying, look at the work you're doing. Another way to say this is also a great quote from another of my friends here in Sweden, Toby. He says, things become better when we accept them as they are, not as we want them to be. So this is, again, start at the beginning, start where you are, not start with like, we want to be the perfect implementation of the Spotify model, or we want to be the perfect safe company. I mean, we will never get there if we do not understand where we are today. So for, final reflections on what is the mindset of a leader in today's world, I think we will not be successful if we do not, as leaders, display humility, vulnerability, curiosity about the org, the future, and the people. And if we don't approach this with love. And I'm sure that, some of you will cringe. Like, is this really the thing to bring into organizations and businesses? And my answer would be absolutely yes, because this is the antidote for what has been happening in so many organizations in terms of fear. So let's replace fear with love. And I encourage you to not be like Alice, who asked the Cheshire cat who was sitting in the tree, what road do I take? The cat asked, where do you want to go? I don't know, Alice answered. Then, said the cat, it really doesn't matter, does it? We can't just take a road up front if we do not know which direction we want to go. So back to the kitchen. We shouldn't be thinking about what kitchen we want, which one wholesale should be brought into our home. But what do we like to do in the kitchen? Do we like to entertain guests, or do we like to cook? What do we want to achieve with our organizations? That's the question I want to leave you with. Thank you so much for listening.